Hey guys, tonight we drift into one of history's most stomach-churning chapters, where punishment wasn't just about justice, it was about making a statement. Imagine a time where boiling someone alive wasn't hidden away behind closed doors. It was public entertainment. You hear the crowd murmuring, your feet crunching on gravel as you approach the platform. There's a massive cauldron set above a roaring fire, and it's not stew that's simmering inside. You can already tell you probably won't survive this, and if you do, you'll wish you hadn't. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Don't forget to comment with your country and the local time. It's always wild seeing who's drifting off to medieval nightmares at 2 a.m. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing outside Smithfield Market in 16th century London. The crowd's thick. The smell of firewood, sweat, and fear floats through the air. You hear metal clanging, chains maybe. A man is being dragged forward. His crime? Coin counterfeiting. His sentence? Boiled alive. This isn't metaphor. This is law. In fact, boiling was made a formal execution method under Henry VIII, specifically for poisoners. No swift swing of an axe, no dignified drop at the gallows. Just heat, bubbling water, and slow cooking, limb by limb. You shift your weight as the fire crackles beneath a massive iron pot filled with oil and pitch. The man's shackled. They lower him in, feet first. And they don't stop lowering until the screaming starts to fade into the hiss of boiling flesh. It's methodical. The idea was to prolong suffering, to make it a warning, a slow death, public, memorable. Historians still argue whether this punishment was used more symbolically or if it was standard practice. But the records are pretty clear. It happened multiple times, sometimes in water, sometimes oil. One account even mentions lead. Now, you're probably wondering, how long could someone even survive this? Surprisingly long. If you go in feet first, the nerves don't shut off instantly. The pain travels, ricochets through the nervous system, and while shock eventually sets in, the mind stays alert for terrifyingly long stretches. According to some accounts, victims could remain conscious until the mid-torso was submerged, which is a very long time when every second feels like eternity. You glance sideways and see children watching this, eating bread, laughing, because for them, it's theater. It's the 1500s equivalent of a Friday night blockbuster. People didn't just accept this, they expected it. And if you think this kind of punishment was exclusive to England, think again. France had its own flavor. Boiling oil with pepper thrown in for good measure. The Holy Roman Empire? They had cauldrons of molten lead. Japan? They used boiling sulfur at certain points in history. There's even a chilling footnote from Russia, where allegedly prisoners were boiled with cold water slowly heated, so they didn't faint too quickly. That part? Historians are divided. Some say it's folklore. Others suggest Tsarist records validate it. But there's one account that haunts you. A young man, barely 18, accused of poisoning a nun's meal. Was he guilty? No one really cared. He was boiled anyway. But halfway through the execution, the crowd got bored. Someone shouted, "Just finish him already." So they dumped him in head first. A splash, a hiss, then silence. You feel that silence in your gut. It's heavy, sticky, like the thick fog that hangs over history's darker corners. You shift your gaze to the pot. The flames have died down now. The crowd's dispersing. Vendors are packing up. For them, the show's over. But for you, this is just the beginning. because boiling wasn't the worst of it. Not by a long shot. The next sound you hear is metal, hollow, ringing, and almost musical. You walk into a stone chamber somewhere in ancient Sicily. There's a massive bronze statue at the center, polished, shaped like a bull. At first, it looks like some kind of art. Then you notice the hatch on its side and the burn marks underneath. This is no sculpture. This is an oven. They call it the brazen bull, one of the most infamous torture devices in ancient history. According to legend, it was the brainchild of a Greek inventor named Perilos of Athens. He designed it for the tyrant Phalaris, a ruler known more for his cruelty than his taste in decor. Here's how it worked. A person would be locked inside the hollow metal bull. A fire was lit underneath. As the victim roasted alive, their screams were channeled through a network of tubes and pipes in the bull's head, so the sound would mimic a bellowing animal. Yes, that's right. It didn't just cook you, it turned your agony into music. According to some stories, Phalaris was so impressed with the acoustic feature that he decided to test it on the inventor himself. You know what they say. If you build a murder bull, make sure you're not the first one inside. The historical accuracy of that story. Historians still debate it. Some claim it's likely an exaggeration meant to paint tyrants in a darker light. Others point to multiple Roman sources that describe similar devices, not just in Sicily, but elsewhere across the Mediterranean. What's not debated is that ancient rulers had a flair for theatrical executions. The brazen bull wasn't just a method of killing. It was performance art. You look closely at the bull. The mouth is slightly open. Inside you can see charred bone fragments. Someone never made it out. And unlike the boiling pot, which was over in minutes, the brazen bull kept people alive long enough for the audience to settle in, pour wine, and enjoy the ambiance. There's even an inscription found in a Roman account, possibly poetic, possibly factual, that read, "The fire sang through bronze. The soul departed in music." Now you're inside the chamber. It's warm. The air smells of iron and soot. The executioner is a quiet man with soot-black hands. He doesn't speak, just nods. You imagine being shoved into that tight space. The door slams behind you. There's no room to move, no light. Then the heat begins. First as a tingling under your feet, then a full-body panic as the metal begins to glow. Some say victims screamed until their lungs collapsed. Others say they died from suffocation before the heat could do its worst. But one obscure detail always sticks out. The creators of the brazen bull designed it with a vent system so the fire wouldn't kill you too fast. After all, what's the point if the audience doesn't get a proper show? You shift, and suddenly the floor feels warmer beneath your feet. Not from imagination, but from the knowledge that humans once gathered in places like this to watch people burn alive inside artwork. Across the centuries, the brazen bull appears in literature, in allegory, even in modern horror films. And while the most famous version sits in the collective memory of ancient Greece, versions of it reportedly popped up in Carthage and Rome as well, sometimes redesigned as lions or even dragons. It was death disguised as art, the intersection of sadism and spectacle. And maybe the cruelest part? The victim's voice, twisted into inhuman animal sounds, meant they couldn't even cry out for mercy. Their final moments were distorted, anonymized, and piped through bronze tubing as if to say, "Your pain is not just ours to witness, it's ours to design." You back away from the statue. The air feels heavier now, like it's pressing in. Somewhere a breeze carries the faintest echo of a metal bellow, and you realize, tonight you're not just drifting through history, you're listening to it scream. Your next step lands on damp stone. You look up, and you're in England again, this time around the 13th century. There's a crowd gathered. A scaffold looms in the square, but this isn't your average hanging. The executioner's preparing a much more elaborate arrangement. You hear murmurs, drawn and quartered. A phrase tossed around so casually now, often without understanding what it actually means. But you're about to witness it in full, grisly detail. Someone accused of high treason, usually a man who dared question the divine right of kings, would face a process so layered in brutality, it makes the brazen bull feel almost efficient. It begins with dragging. You're bound with ropes and tied behind a horse or cart. No gentle ride. You're scraped, bruised, often unconscious before even reaching the scaffold. And that's the least painful part. Then you're hanged, but not until death. The key word here is until. The goal wasn't to kill you with the rope, just weaken you. You're lifted by the neck until you're gasping, limbs flailing, body twitching, your throat bruising as your feet scramble for the ground. But before the end comes, you're cut down. This is where it gets worse, much worse. The next step? Disembowelment, slowly. Your belly's cut open, organs pulled out, intestines especially, while you're still alive, still conscious. Sometimes they'd burn your entrails in front of you, just to emphasize the point. Your betrayal won't be forgotten. Historians still argue whether victims remained aware throughout, or if shock dulled their perception. But either way, survival wasn't part of the plan. Then comes the quartering. Your body is literally cut into 4 parts: arms, legs, head removed and placed on spikes or gates. London Bridge became a grotesque trophy case for traders. Imagine walking to market and passing someone's father nailed to a wooden post. This wasn't just execution. It was posthumous messaging. One account from 1305 details the execution of William Wallace, the Scottish knight romanticized in pop culture. But the real story. He was stripped naked, dragged for miles, partially hanged, eviscerated, beheaded, and chopped into quarters. His head was displayed on London Bridge, his limbs sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth, like postcards, but with bones. You feel a cold shiver, not from fear, but from the methodical cruelty. Nothing here was impulsive. Every moment was designed. Even the crowds weren't just spectators. They were participants. People brought children, sold snacks. It was a spectacle with all the grim finality of theater. And there's a strange detail most people don't know. Executioners were trained in this process. It took skill to gut someone without killing them instantly, to sever joints cleanly, to make the horror last. Some monarchs even added speeches or prayers into the ceremony, blessings right before the guts hit the floor. A divine send-off. Can't forget your manners. You glance over your shoulder. The rope still swings from the gallows. The wooden block is stained. The crows have already gathered. There's no music here, no boiling pot or echo chamber, just wood, blood, and silence. And yet in some ways, this was the most honest form of punishment. No decoration, no false elegance, just raw, unapologetic pain, offered up to a cheering crowd. Later, in the 1800s, Britain formally abolished this punishment. Too barbaric, they said. And yet it had lasted for over 500 years. You wonder what changed. Our sense of mercy, or just our appetite for watching suffering evolve into quieter forms. You take one last look at the scaffold, then turn away. But as you walk, A small voice in your head whispers, "What crime would you have to commit to deserve all that? And what if they just got your name wrong? You're not standing anymore. You're lying flat, limbs stretched out like a starfish on a wooden platform. Ropes tighten at your wrists and ankles. Around you, a small crowd gathers, less rowdy than usual. They're not here for the noise. They're here for precision. This is breaking on the wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel. A punishment so slow, so painfully deliberate, that it was considered merciful only if the executioner was drunk and sloppy. But let's assume he's sober today. The wheel itself isn't the kind that rolls. It's a wagon wheel, large and spoked, laid flat. You're tied to it, limbs stretched over the spokes like you're part of the furniture. The executioner lifts a thick iron bar, sometimes a hammer, sometimes a blunt mace, and with a quiet breath, brings it down. Not on your head. That would be too quick. First, the legs. He aims between the bones to avoid shattering the limb completely. Instead, the force snaps it in place. Maybe the shin, maybe the thigh, turning bone to powder without breaking the skin. You scream, of course. Or maybe you can't. Maybe you already bit your tongue clean through. Then the arms. The blows are measured, rhythmic, a kind of gruesome tempo. One limb at a time until nothing bends the way it should. Then, and this part feels almost theatrical, they thread your mashed limbs through the wheel's spokes, like weaving meat through a basket. You're left there, exposed, crumpled like a marionette with its strings cut. Sometimes the wheel is lifted onto a tall pole, so your mangled body can be seen from miles away, twisting in the wind, birds already circling. Occasionally they'd light a fire underneath, not to burn you alive, but to warm you up, so the crows wouldn't get to you too soon. Historians still argue whether victims could survive this for hours or days. There are records of people begging for death long after the bones were dust. And if the crowd was merciful, someone might throw a stone to finish it. But mercy was rare. In France and Germany, the wheel became a preferred method for those who committed heinous crimes, murder, arson, blasphemy. But the real reason it was popular? It was visible. Like a rotting billboard that said, "Cross the line, and this will be you." One infamous case involved a thief named Franz Seubold. Records say he was broken on the wheel in 1589 and left alive. His cries echoed for 30 hours before death came. 30 hours, with no water, no painkillers, just sky, flies, and shattered limbs. And here's a creepy little footnote. In some places, the number of blows was predetermined by law. Not just kill him, but kill him with exactly 11 strikes. No more, no less. Which means someone sat down with a quill and counted. There were variations, of course. In some regions, they reversed the order, starting with the chest or neck to grant mercy. In others, they tied people underneath the wheel, then rolled it across them like a heavy spoked steamroller. But the most haunting detail? Some versions ended not with death, but with display. The body, twisted and threaded through the wheel, was left on the outskirts of towns for months, as a warning, as a lesson, as a reminder that you weren't safe unless you obeyed. And eventually the people passing by stopped noticing. Just another broken shape on the horizon. You blink. The wheel is empty now, the platform quiet, and yet the shape of it, circular, endless, lingers in your mind, like a punishment that never truly stops spinning. You're standing near a swampy riverbank. The sun is baking the mud, and there's a strange sweetness in the air, milk and honey, thick and rotting. You follow the scent and find A boat. Or something that used to be a boat. It's half submerged in green water, lashed to a second, identical one stacked above it. Between them is a human-shaped gap, and in that narrow coffin of wood, someone lies motionless. This is scaphism, a Persian punishment so twisted it almost feels fictional, except it's been described in chilling detail by classical historians. They even gave it nicknames: the boats, the honey torture, death by vermin. You step closer. The man inside is tied down, his arms and legs extended. His head, hands, and feet poke through holes, while the rest of his body is trapped inside the closed boats. Then comes the feeding. The executioners pour a mix of milk and honey into his mouth, far more than he can handle. He gags, but they keep going. It's not about kindness. It's about causing diarrhea, constant, uncontrollable. His body becomes a sticky, fermenting feast for every insect within miles. But it doesn't stop there. More honey is poured over his exposed skin, his eyes, his ears. Between his fingers and toes, they smear it across his mouth, even in the nostrils. At first, it just attracts flies, but soon, wasps, ants, beetles, creatures crawl into his ears, his open wounds, his mouth if he sleeps. And sleep does come, briefly. The heat makes you faint. The pain wakes you back up. The process takes days, sometimes weeks. There are records of victims surviving for 17 days in this state, baking in the sun, hallucinating from thirst, eyes swollen shut, body devoured from within. Plutarch, the Greek historian, claimed scaphism was used to punish traitors in the Persian Empire, particularly during the reign of King Artaxerxes II. But modern scholars still argue over whether it was exaggerated propaganda by the Greeks or a real execution method buried by time. One detail that lends credibility: there's no other method in the ancient world that lines up so neatly with the natural behavior of insects. In hot climates, decomposition happens fast. But scaphism wasn't about speed. It was about keeping you alive long enough for the insects to burrow deeper. Some versions had guards feeding the victim daily. Milk and honey, to keep the digestive horror going, like maintenance on a rotting machine. You glance at the water again. It's dark, still, but you swear something's moving beneath the surface. Tiny ripples, wings, legs. And the man inside? He's not screaming anymore, just groaning. A low, constant sound, like someone lost in fever. His skin is blistered. His lips are gone. One eye seems to be moving. The other isn't. People walk by. Some avert their gaze. Others watch. One child tosses a pebble. A woman crosses herself. And yet no one stops it. Because this here is justice. This here is a message. You think of how slow it must be, how hopeless, not just killed, but used as a platform for suffering. The body turned into bait, then into waste, and finally into a rotting lesson for the next person who dared betray the king. There's no crowd cheering now, just buzzing, and that sickly sweet smell. You step away from the boats, trying not to look back. But the sound of insects follows you anyway. You feel the heat before you even see it. A dry, metallic warmth that clings to the air like smoke after a house fire. Your surroundings dim. Torches flicker low on soot-stained walls, casting shadows on the figure in the center. There, in the heart of a stone chamber, is a throne. But not the kind you'd want to sit on. This is the iron chair, and if it had a motto, it would be, "Sit still and die slowly." At first glance, it resembles a regular chair. But you notice the spikes, hundreds of them, covering every surface. The seat, the backrest, the arms, the footrest, even the headrest. Some point outward, most point inward, And the chair isn't cold, it's warm, because beneath it, hidden in a cavity below, is a bed of coals. This wasn't just about impalement. It was about cooking a person from underneath, one spike at a time. As the chair heats, metal conducts the burn into flesh, slowly roasting the victim while holding them perfectly still. The spikes didn't penetrate deeply. They were designed to cause shallow wounds that would fester and sizzle. Imagine being strapped in, skin pinched by metal, the heat rising beneath you like a creeping fever. You try to shift, and the spikes push back. You scream, and the metal just absorbs it. The most terrifying part? Sometimes they didn't heat the chair at all. They just sat you in it and told you they would. The psychological torture was just as potent. You could sit there for hours, bleeding from 100 pricks, waiting for the fire to start, dreading the moment it did. In some dungeons, they'd light small fires nearby, not under the chair. So the victim smelled smoke without knowing if it was their turn next. Historians still debate how frequently the iron chair was actually used. Some argue it's more myth than widespread method, a product of 18th century exaggeration. But accounts from Spain, Italy, and parts of the Holy Roman Empire suggest otherwise. In Spain, they called it the silla de hierro. In Germany, it was sometimes paired with spiked cuffs for the wrists and ankles, ensuring the victim couldn't even twitch without punishment. And then there's the version used during the Inquisition, where the accused was questioned while seated, every flinch considered a confession. You blink. You're now inside the chair, strapped in. You feel the spikes at your back like a warning. And though the fire hasn't started yet, the sweat on your neck makes it feel like it has. You want to shift, but you don't. Not because you're brave, but because you've already seen what happens when the metal gets hot. How skin sticks, how blood pools beneath the seat, and then sizzles as it drips through the grating. One story whispers through your memory. An unnamed nobleman accused of conspiring against a local baron. No trial, just the chair. It's said he lasted 5 hours before the smoke from his thighs filled the room. The executioner took lunch halfway through. Another account describes prisoners urinating in terror as they were strapped in, the liquid shorting out the fire prematurely. The guards laughed, then started again. The worst part? Some versions had spikes that could retract. They'd lull the victim into thinking the device was broken, then crank them back out once the fire started. It was all about control, all about making sure you understood. Every part of this was intentional. You're not dead yet. You're not even dying. But you're not getting out either. And in this place, death isn't the punishment. Waiting for it is. Now you're in a different kind of room, darker, more intimate. No torches here, just a single candle flickering in a corner, casting long, spindly shadows along the damp walls. There's a table in the center. On it, a strange metal object glints in the low light. It looks delicate, almost ornamental, like something found in a dentist's office or a cursed jewelry box. You step closer and realize what it is, the pear of anguish. At first you wonder why it's called that. Then you see the shape, bulbous at the base, tapering to a point, a turn screw at the top. When cranked, it opens, not outward, but internally, like a flower blooming inside itself. And now, suddenly, the name makes sense. Legend says it was inserted into the mouth, or, depending on the crime, elsewhere. Once in place, the executioner would slowly turn the screw, causing the petals to open inside the body. The result? Tearing, rupturing, unimaginable agony from within. And all of it in silence, No dramatic platform, no roaring crowd. Just cold surgical pain in a stone room like this one. Historians still argue whether this device was actually used as commonly as some claim. It doesn't show up in every torture catalog. Some scholars think it might have been symbolic or ceremonial. Others argue it was real and worse, a specialized tool for punishing women accused of heresy, witchcraft, or loose behavior. You shiver. The intimacy of this punishment makes it feel different from the rest. No boiling, no burning, just a quiet, creeping horror inserted and slowly unwound. A few 17th century Inquisition documents mention a metal pear used to punish those who blasphemed. In one version, it was placed in the mouth, stretching the jaw, shattering teeth. In another, it was used on women accused of false confessions, inserted as a final reminder not to speak again. You notice something on the floor, a stain, dried, rust brown. Was it blood? Or had the device simply corroded from years of use? You reach out, just to touch it, and stop yourself, because it's still slightly open, and you can feel what it would be like if it kept turning. There's another story, half whispered, about a thief who begged to have his hands cut off instead. Anything but the pear. They didn't listen. The executioner that day was noted as being unusually quiet. When asked afterward if it had worked, he reportedly said, "It bloomed. That's all." And now you're watching it on the table, its petals slowly closing again, like a flower wilting after a long day in the sun. You think about all the punishments you've seen so far, boiling, burning, breaking. But this is personal. This was never about spectacle. This was about taking away dignity. One screw turn at a time. You're back outside again, but it's no relief. The air is muggy, heavy with the scent of waste and old metal. You're in a dungeon courtyard, stone walls rising high above you, blotting out the sky like a giant mouth about to close. You hear squeaking, not the innocent kind from toys or rusted hinges. No, this is sharper, frantic. And then you see the cage. Inside, a rat, trapped in a small metal container. The other half of that container is open, pressed flat against the stomach of a terrified man. His shirt's already been torn away. His chest rises and falls like a panicked bird. He knows what's coming. And so do you. This is rat torture, one of the most viscerally disturbing punishments devised, not because of the tools, but because of what it forces another living creature to do. The method is cruelly simple. A rat is placed inside a metal bowl or cage, which is then strapped to the bare stomach of the victim. Heat is applied, usually with hot coals or a flame on the back of the cage. The rat, desperate to escape, does the only thing it can. It starts digging into you. It claws, bites, burrows into the soft flesh of the abdomen. And it doesn't stop. Not when the skin breaks, not when the blood flows. It digs to survive. And in doing so, it becomes the instrument of one of history's most dreadful tortures. Historical records show this technique was used in various parts of the world. Ancient China, the Spanish Inquisition, and even in 17th century South America under colonial rule. One of the most infamous documented cases comes from the Dutch Revolt, where soldiers reportedly used heated pots and starving rats to extract confessions. Some versions even involved multiple rats. And here's a fact that will sit with you long after tonight. Rats don't stop once they're in. They keep chewing. They panic. They follow warmth and darkness. There are reports, contested but unnervingly detailed, that victims' intestines were partially devoured while they were still alive. You step backward instinctively, but the image clings like wet cloth. Some accounts suggest victims were held down, not just with rope, but with iron braces across their arms and legs, not to prevent escape, just to keep them from thrashing so much they'd die too quickly, because the whole point was to make it last. One 18th century torture manual mentions that heat should be applied gradually, not to ignite panic too early in the rat. The goal was to create desperation, not chaos, controlled horror. Historians still debate whether the rat always killed the victim, or if it was just used to create unbearable pain. Either way, the aftermath was never clean. Infection, internal bleeding, psychological breakdown, no one left the table the same. And here's your quirky fringe fact for tonight. Some prisons reportedly used ice rats as a psychological threat. The rat would be chilled first, then placed on bare skin to warm up. No fire, no burrowing, just the tickle of cold claws waking up, followed by the terrifying thought, what if they change their minds? You look at the man now. He's not screaming, not yet. He's holding his breath, maybe praying that the rat inside won't choose panic. But you know it will. You can almost feel the heat from the fire starting behind the cage. The rat shifts, and somewhere in the darkness, a guard quietly tightens the straps. Not because he enjoys this, just because it's protocol. You turn away, but not before you hear the first sickening scratch. The air is still now, and somehow that makes it worse. No screaming, no fire crackling, no rats scurrying in cages. Just silence, and a wooden frame in the middle of a dusty clearing. From a distance, it almost looks like a ladder propped upright. But you know better now. This is a sawing frame, and what's about to happen here, well, you're not going to forget it. You step closer. The setup is disarmingly simple. Ropes, pulleys, and a long curved saw, one that requires 2 men to operate, one on each side. The victim is strung up upside down, ankles bound, wrists dangling loosely. Their legs are parted, and they're hung just high enough for gravity to do its cruel job. This isn't the kind of sawing you're thinking of, the quick slice of a limb during battlefield amputations or back alley punishments. No, this is methodical. From the groin, down, slowly, carefully, as if they were slicing meat, not a human being. And because they're inverted, the blood doesn't rush away. It pools at the head, keeping the victim conscious for as long as possible. You feel your stomach twist. The 2 executioners begin the process. One pushes, one pulls. Push, pull. The saw sinks slowly between the legs, shredding flesh, severing muscle. The sound isn't even the worst part. It's the way the victim doesn't pass out. Not right away. Not for a long time. Historical records trace this gruesome punishment to multiple regions. Ancient Rome, medieval Europe, and the Ottoman Empire all had versions. In Romania, during the reign of the notoriously sadistic Vlad the Impaler, it was used as both punishment and performance. Some scholars argue the sawing was used primarily for traitors and religious dissenters. Others think it was meant to degrade as much as kill. Public humiliation carried to anatomical extremes. There's even a recorded incident in 15th century Spain where a merchant accused of spying was given the choice between hanging or sawing. He chose hanging. They sawed him anyway. Why? Because it sent a clearer message. You scan the frame now. It's worn, the wood dark from years of sun, and other things. You try not to look too long at the stains between the beams. There's a bucket nearby, filled with water. Not for mercy, just to clean the saw between uses. And here's a haunting little fact for you. Some frames were portable. Travelers in medieval times sometimes carried miniature sawing rigs for quick executions on the road. Foldable terror, ready to unpack anywhere justice needed. Efficiency. You can feel the weight of the saw in your own hands. It's not hard to operate. No special skill, just stamina, and a complete lack of empathy. Historians still argue whether the use of gravity to prolong life was intentional or incidental. Some believe the upside-down method was discovered by accident. Others insist it was designed that way, on purpose, to keep the victim alive until the blade reached the diaphragm. You look up. The body on the frame isn't moving anymore, but you can still hear the saw, push, pull, push, pull. And now, there's a crowd watching, not cheering, just observing. Some turn away, others watch every second, like it's necessary, like it proves something. You try to walk away, but in your head, the sound continues. Push, pull, push. You step indoors again, away from the frame, only to find yourself in a dim, windowless chamber, quiet, but thick with the kind of silence that knows it's temporary. Torches line the walls here, their flames flickering without warmth. In the center of the room is a small wooden table, well worn from centuries of use. But your eyes are drawn to what's on top of it. Thumb screws. At first glance, they seem modest, almost quaint. 2 wooden blocks held together with a screw mechanism. But this little device has crushed more digits and broken more wills than some of the most theatrical torture machines ever made. You inch closer. The setup is brutally simple. Place the fingers, or sometimes toes, between the 2 blocks, then slowly turn the screw. The more you turn, the tighter it clamps. Bones crack, nails split, skin tears, and joints dislocate. But the victim rarely dies, at least not from the tool itself. No, this was designed for confession, not spectacle, just answers. And often those answers didn't even need to be true, just convincing enough to stop the pain. You pick one up, hypothetically, of course. You're smarter than to touch these things. It's heavier than expected. The wood is stained and splintered. You can almost imagine the last hand it held. Knuckles white, blood seeping from beneath a thumbnail, the prisoner desperately gasping out words between clenched teeth. The device was popular across Europe during the medieval and early modern periods. The Spanish Inquisition used it liberally, as did Scottish witch hunters. Its portability made it a favorite among field interrogators, and in some particularly twisted cases, it was used not only on fingers, but on genitalia, a cruel adaptation that even some executioners reportedly refused to administer. Your quirky tidbit for this section? There was once a double-screw thumb screw used specifically for suspected liars. It allowed the torturer to crush both thumbs simultaneously, but with an uneven turn ratio, so one side always hurt more. Why? So the victim would begin to favor one hand, and the interrogator would know which answer was more truthful. And this wasn't the only small-scale horror in their toolbox. Next to the thumb screws lie other finger-focused devices, nail pullers, pinchers, and a terrifying little invention known as the boot, a wooden or metal casing that enclosed the lower leg and was then filled with wedges or boiling liquid, crushing bones or boiling flesh without ever breaking the skin. Historians still argue whether the boot was more symbolic than effective. Some claim the fear of it did more damage than the tool itself. Others insist it shattered ankles so badly that even survivors never walked the same again. You see something scrawled on the wall, an engraving etched into the stone by some long-forgotten prisoner. I told them everything, and they kept turning. There's no mention of what was asked, or whether the answers helped anyone, just that the screws didn't stop when the truth did. And now you're sitting there, watching those same screws. You can hear them turning, slow and deliberate. That soft wooden groan, that gentle click as the screw tightens. Click, click. And with each turn, a little more of you clenches. Not just your fingers, but your breath, your teeth, your heart. Because it's not about how much pain you can take. It's about how long you can keep your story straight while your hands fall apart. You exit the chamber, hands aching at the thought of thumb screws, only to find yourself walking into a long stone corridor lit by narrow slits of daylight. You hear water dripping, chains clinking faintly, and then laughter. Not the joyful kind. This laughter is dry, almost robotic, repetitive. You follow it, hesitantly, until you find yourself facing a bizarre device. A chair, but not any chair. This is the Judas cradle. At first glance, it seems more like a piece of abstract sculpture, a pointed pyramid rising from a sturdy base, with leather straps hanging loose from overhead beams. It looks absurd until your eyes travel down to the very tip of that pyramid, and then you understand. The victim would be stripped, hoisted above the pointed tip by ropes, and then slowly lowered until their body rested directly on that sharp apex. The weight of their own body would do the rest. No blades, no fire, just cold gravity. You take a step back instinctively. This punishment wasn't designed to kill, at least not right away. It was meant to humiliate, to stretch, and to pierce slowly. In some cases, the process took hours, sometimes days. The victim would be periodically raised and lowered, the pyramid tip gradually tearing into the most sensitive parts of their body. Men and women. And the laughter? It wasn't from joy. It was from madness. Some victims, it said, began laughing uncontrollably after hours of pain and humiliation, their minds snapping under the strain. A defense mechanism of the brain, or maybe the soul. Here's a curious historical nugget. Some versions of the Judas cradle were hygienically wiped between uses with vinegar-soaked rags. You'd think this was to prevent infection, but in reality, it just kept victims alive longer. Vinegar burns and reopened wounds. A double insult. The origins of the cradle are debated. Many link it to the Spanish Inquisition, though records are scattered. Some scholars argue that the device was more myth than mainstream, citing the lack of consistent documentation. Others point to regional torture museums and 17th century sketches that suggest otherwise. Whether widespread or not, its legacy is etched and sharpened. You glance at the straps again. They weren't just to hold you up. Sometimes they were twisted, angled just right to rock the victim, gently grinding them down the pyramid like a slow, burning carousel ride from hell. The room is quiet now, except you swear you hear the creak of ropes. Just once. You back away, your thighs clenching instinctively, even though you're perfectly safe. A sharp chill travels up your spine, not from cold, from empathy. That's the worst part, isn't it? Not imagining yourself as the executioner, but knowing exactly where you'd sit. The room that follows should be a relief. It's well lit, airy even. No torches, no dripping water, no ominous contraptions. But then you notice the racks on the wall, neatly arranged like musical instruments. Only these aren't for concerts. They're shaming devices, not execution, not torture. Just humiliation, drawn out like a parade of ridicule. Tools designed not to kill you, but to make sure you never walk through town the same way again. Let's start with the scold's bridle, also known as the brank, a metal cage that enclosed the entire head with a flat iron plate inserted into the mouth. This plate pressed down on the tongue or even included a spike to punish speech. Women, often accused of gossip, witchcraft, or simply speaking too freely, were paraded around town in these contraptions. Talking back wasn't an option. Talking at all became unbearable. And if the townspeople jeered, that was the point. You reach out and almost recoil. The inside is rusted, the tongue plate jagged. There are scratch marks on the metal, as if someone tried in vain to get it off with their bare hands. Close by hangs the flute of shame, a long iron pipe that clamped around a musician's fingers and neck. Originally for those who played poorly or disturbed the peace, it slowly evolved into a punishment for any performer who dared defy the expectations of nobility or church. A man once played a satirical song in a village square, mocking a local noble. The next day he was seen wearing the flute, stumbling through cobblestone streets, his hands locked into playing position. The irony? The crowd cheered. You pass another wall, this one covered in pillories and stocks, where heads and arms were locked into place for hours or days. But it wasn't the confinement that broke people. It was the public scorn. Rotted vegetables, excrement, and even live rats were hurled at prisoners trapped in town squares. You didn't just endure the sentence. You became the entertainment. One fringe device stands out among the rest, something called the donkey saddle. It was used primarily for women accused of infidelity or nagging. The saddle was placed on a wooden beam, narrow and painful. The victim would straddle it while weights were tied to her ankles, pulling her downward as the beam dug in. Historically, scholars debate whether these punishments genuinely reduced crime or simply enforced social control. Some argue they were used more for silencing undesirables than actual justice. Others suggest communities used shame because jails were too expensive, and laughter, apparently, was free. There's a plaque on the wall that reads, "Pain fades, but disgrace lingers." You can't help but agree. These punishments didn't end at the square. They followed you home. They followed your family. They followed your name. You imagine it. Walking through your own neighborhood wearing a metal mask with donkey ears or a flute locked to your face. Hearing children laugh, seeing old friends look away, knowing your real punishment wasn't over when the device came off, but when people forgot why it was put there in the first place, you blink and look away. The devices don't move. They don't need to. They've already whispered to you everything they came to say. You step through the next doorway, and for a moment the air feels warmer, thick, smoky, heavy with the scent of charred wood and something more, metallic. You're not sure if it's imagined, but the moment your foot crosses the threshold, you feel the heat. There's no need to guess what punishment ruled this room. Burning at the stake. You've seen the images, wood piled high, a figure bound upright, flames licking at the sky. But what you probably haven't thought about is just how long it took. People didn't go up in a flash like a dry leaf. They simmered, slowly, painfully. The fire worked its way up, inch by inch, as the crowd watched. And yes, there was always a crowd. This was public theater. The punishment reserved for heretics, witches, and anyone who annoyed the church a little too loudly. You move closer to the center of the room where a large wooden pole stands, charred at the base. Thick iron rings still cling to it, their purpose all too clear. There's ash scattered across the stone floor, not real, you hope, but enough to make your shoes crunch softly. Here's a grim detail. The fire was rarely started at full strength. That would be merciful. No. Executioners often lit it low so the victim would slowly suffocate from smoke before the flames ever reached their torso. It was considered a kindness by medieval standards. But not everyone got that kindness. Some were burned alive, fully aware, screaming into the smoke while the onlookers, many of whom were friends, neighbors, or even former parishioners, stood by unmoved. And if the accused refused to scream, that was taken as proof they were in league with the devil. It's a no-win game. And what did it take to end up here? Sometimes, just a whispered accusation, a misunderstood dream, owning a black cat, or, in one famous case, writing a love letter in Latin that a village elder didn't understand and assumed must be a spell. One of the quirkiest fringe tidbits about burnings. In 16th century France, certain officials were paid extra if they ensured the accused's heart exploded from heat during execution, because it was seen as a cleaner death. Supposedly, it meant the soul had fled faster. Of course, historians still argue whether the explosion effect is even real. Some believe it's an exaggeration, urban legend born from second-hand reports and embellished chronicles. Others say it's entirely plausible. Under the right heat conditions, organs do rupture. You move around the stake and you notice something small, half hidden in the floor. A singed rosary bead, melted into the stone. It could be fake, decorative, but your mind runs with the idea that someone clutched it here, trembling, whispering prayers that rose into the smoke. There's a quiet madness in that kind of faith. To be moments from death and still believe there's someone, anyone, listening. Before you leave, you glance once more at the stake. For all the horror, it's oddly simple. Just wood, stone, and iron. But that's the terrifying part. How ordinary it looks for something that once decided whether you lived or burned. You emerge from the burnt-out silence and enter a space that feels colder. Not physically, but psychologically. The room is unremarkable at first. No towering contraptions, no glowing embers or cages. Just stone benches, a drained basin, and one lone table. But the stillness? It presses. You sit. And that's when you hear it. Drip, drip, drip. You glance upward. A single water droplet falls every few seconds from a narrow pipe. The floor beneath it is stained, indented, eroded. Welcome to the quiet cruelty of water torture. You've probably heard of the Chinese water torture. The victim strapped down, completely still, while cold droplets land rhythmically on the same point of their forehead. Not fast, not loud, just slow. Endless. At first it's annoying, then maddening. Then, according to some historical accounts, it breaks the mind. The genius of this method lies in its utter subtlety. No blood, no broken bones, just psychological erosion, drop by drop. Now let's pan out. This room wasn't dedicated to one method. It was a gallery of dread, where water became the medium for many twisted variations of punishment. In one corner stands a mock version of the water dungeon, a small enclosure where prisoners were submerged up to their necks for hours, or even days. The water wasn't clean. The floor wasn't level. Rats often floated nearby. People emerged from this experience covered in ulcers, eyes bloodshot, minds unraveling from sensory deprivation and constant dampness. Another popular method? Simulated drowning. You might know it today by a modern term, waterboarding. But its roots trace back centuries. The Inquisition called it toca. A cloth was placed over the face, water poured over it, and the victim's gag reflex activated almost immediately. No lungs filled. No actual drowning occurred. But the brain didn't know that. It thought you were dying, over and over, for minutes, hours, sometimes longer. Some scholars argue this kind of torment is worse than physical torture, because the body heals, but panic doesn't fade easily. And dreams, they remember. Here's a fringe tidbit. In some old European naval records, there's mention of keel hauling as a form of watery punishment. Sailors were tied to ropes and dragged underneath ships, their backs scraping against barnacles and wood. If they didn't drown, they emerged shredded, half-drowned, barely conscious. And yet, commanders often recorded it as a disciplinary correction. Historians debate whether keel hauling was real or exaggerated naval lore. Some say it was rare, symbolic, or dramatized. Others insist the documentation, especially from Dutch fleets, is proof enough. You reach out and touch the bench. It's still slightly damp. Maybe it's just your imagination, or maybe this room has soaked up every scream that didn't echo loudly enough to be remembered in the books. There's something unnerving about how quiet this all is. No flames, no iron, just water. The thing you bathe in, drink, seek out when thirsty, turned against you. As you stand to leave, the drip continues, relentless, gentle, deadly. Drip, drip, drip. You don't even realize you're holding your breath. This final chamber feels different, not because it's more gruesome, but because it's more personal. The lighting is dimmer. The walls are closer. You can hear your own breathing now, soft and steady. At the far end of the room, there's no towering device, no iron jaws, no fire pit, just a chair. A plain wooden one, slightly tilted, placed on a small raised platform. But don't let the simplicity fool you. This is where the punishment didn't involve racks or flames, but you. Your own body, your own soul, turned against itself. This is the realm of solitary torment. See, not all cruelty came from pain. Some came from nothing at all. Monks, prisoners, or political enemies were sometimes sentenced to total sensory deprivation. No human contact, no noise, just endless, unchanging silence. Some sat in dark, windowless cells for years. No conversation, no light, no concept of time. People who entered sane didn't always leave that way. Some emerged mumbling prayers that looped endlessly. Some had forgotten how to speak. One famous prisoner, kept in solitary by a German prince for 27 years, believed the walls were whispering by the end. And then there was public silence, a punishment where the condemned were forced into normal life but forbidden from speaking. A scarlet mark or iron collar labeled them a criminal. Neighbors were instructed not to speak to them. If they did, they too could be punished. Imagine it, living among people who looked through you. Shops refused you. Strangers whispered about you, but never to you. The only thing worse than being hated is being completely ignored. That chair. It's used for a punishment called the vigil stool. You were required to sit, still, upright, often naked, for hours or days. No sleeping, no shifting. Any movement earned extra time. There were no chains, just expectation. And a lot of watching. The most unsettling part? It worked. People begged for something else. Anything else. Even whipping. There's a scholarly debate about whether these punishments left deeper scars than physical torture. Some historians argue that emotional isolation, especially when extended, created longer-lasting trauma. Others insist that it was more humane than mutilation or death. Either way, the result was the same. You were shaped by the silence, bent if not broken, and often it wasn't the authorities who hurt you the most. It was your community, their withdrawal, their cold eyes, their refusal to say your name. At the edge of the room is a small mirror, clouded and warped. You look into it. The face staring back seems fine, maybe a little tired. But for a second you wonder, what would you look like after 30 days in this room? You turn away, suddenly thankful for the sound of your own breath again. You walk slowly toward the exit, not rushing, just listening to yourself still exist. And now, as the door gently closes behind you, the echoes of these punishments begin to fade, like smoke dissipating in the morning light. The footsteps that brought you through dungeons and gallows now slow, softening on the cool stone floor beneath you. Take a moment. Let your breath ease into a quieter rhythm. Whatever shadows followed you through this long, winding story, leave them behind in the stillness. Imagine yourself walking out into a gentle field, the grass brushing against your ankles, a wind carrying away the heavy air. The sky is dusky blue now, and above it, stars blink quietly, indifferent, eternal, and peaceful. The horrors of the past, real as they were, now rest in their dusty corners of history. They can't touch you here. You've walked through fire and cold iron and silence, and yet here you are, whole, breathing, thinking, maybe even smiling a little. Let your body sink into softness. Feel the pillow under your cheek, the blanket pulled snug around your shoulder. You're warm, you're safe. And whatever cruelty this world once held, it has no place in the quiet you found now. Only stories remain. And stories, after all, are just whispers of what once was. Let them fade. Let your eyes close. Let yourself drift. You made it.